Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore how a single, almost unbelievable historical clash from 50 years ago sparked a massive debate over software ownership that's literally still raging today. We're talking about an incredible piece of tech history, a moment when the very concept of buying and selling computer code was totally up for grabs. It's a wild story of frantic coding, a dropped paper tape, and an angry letter that, quite frankly, changed the world.
Now, what's really interesting about this explosive accusation from a 20-year-old Bill Gates is that it set the stage for a 50-year ideological battle. Think about it. Today, we swipe our credit cards for software subscriptions without a second thought, right? But in 1976, this was a radical, highly controversial idea. Gates was absolutely furious, and his words drew a line in the sand that defined the modern computing ecosystem.
Let's look at Section 1, the birth of Microsoft.
To really understand the friction here, we first have to look at the high-stakes origin story of the software in question, Altair BASIC. After seeing this new microcomputer in Popular Electronics, Gates and Paul Allen confidently promised a working BASIC interpreter to the creator. Actually, scratch that. The crazy part is they didn't even have an Altair. They developed it using an Intel emulator running on a massive PDP-10 computer at Harvard. They were cutting it so incredibly close that Paul Allen literally had to write the bootloader code in machine language mid-flight on his way to the demo. So the crucial point here is that this tiny, scrappy team managed to build a powerful tool in an incredibly constrained environment. They even brought in another Harvard student, Monty Davidoff, to add complex floating-point arithmetic. And they had to cram all of this functionality into just a few kilobytes of space. It was like a giant puzzle, an absolute masterclass in efficient coding. As you'll see here, looking at the 4K versus 8K versions, this software was an engineering marvel for its time. The initial 4K version left just 790 bytes free for the user's actual program. To put that into perspective, that is practically nothing. But it was the 8K version that really changed the game. It added string variables, Boolean logic, all sorts of advanced math functions. And that specific 8K version, it became the bedrock for almost all home computer versions of BASIC that followed.
Moving right along to Section 2, the paper tape heist.
But before they could even officially sell this marvel of engineering, the software was essentially kidnapped by the very community it was built for. And this wasn't just a simple mistake. It was the inciting incident for a cultural heist. During a demo of the Altair in Palo Alto, a paper tape containing the entirety of Altair BASIC was somehow dropped on the floor, and someone in the crowd just scooped it right up. And this brilliantly illustrates the early hacker ethos. A systems tester named Dan Sokol took that code, duplicated it, and brought a box full of copies to the legendary Homebrew Computer Club. And he charged what he thought was the proper price, exactly $0. They held this deep belief that computer programs were essentially math and logic, meaning they belonged to everybody, to share, tinker with, and improve. Which brings us to Section 3, the letter to hobbyists. Now, naturally, expecting royalties for their hard work, this brand new company called Microsoft was not happy with this free-flowing distribution. Gates argued that just the computer time they used to write the software had a tangible value of over $40,000. For a couple of college kids in the 1970s, that's a staggering amount of money. He wanted to make it crystal clear. Software development wasn't just typing. It was an expensive, resource-intensive manufacturing process. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is Gates's math. He estimated a massive 90% of the people using Altair BASIC had pirated it. When he ran the numbers against the few legitimate sales they actually made, he calculated that they were being paid a measly $2 an hour for their groundbreaking work. You can totally see why he was so frustrated. So Gates sits down and pens his famous open letter to hobbyists. He neutrally but firmly made the strict commercial argument that stealing software stifles the creation of better professional tools. His logic was simple. If developers can't make a living writing code, they're going to stop writing code, and the whole computer revolution will just stall out.
Well, the hobbyists did not take kindly to being called thieves. Pioneers like Lee Felsenstein quickly fired back, pointing out that Gates's $40,000 claim was just funny money, highly inflated paper costs. Plus, the official price tag for a standalone copy of BASIC was $500. I mean, in 1976, that was an absolute fortune. The hobbyists felt they had already invested massive brainpower and cash into building these physical machines, and they weren't about to pay an arbitrary corporate fee just to make the hardware run. That kicks off Section 4, the Open Source Rebellion. So, what does this all mean?
The crucial point is that this early friction birthed the legal and cultural frameworks that would eventually power the modern web. This rift forced the community to organize. In direct response to Gates, hobbyists started writing their own code, like Tiny Basic, to circumvent Microsoft entirely. This actually led to the very first use of the term copyleft in 1976, which was a playful jab at copyright, designed to ensure software remained freely accessible. Let's move to how this builds into two very distinct philosophies. On the left, we have the free software movement, kicked off by Richard Stallman in 1983. This was fiercely ideological, treating code almost like a fundamental human right. Then, on the right, we have open source, defined by Bruce Perens in 1998. This was a highly practical rebranding, aimed squarely at convincing the corporate world that collaborative, shared code was simply a better, more efficient way to build technology. And this brilliantly illustrates the corporate skepticism of the time. When Bruce Perens went to work on open source strategies, Steve Jobs flat out told him he didn't believe in it. Jobs argued it took a billion-dollar lab to make a great operating system, so open source just wouldn't cut it. But here is the amazing irony. Just 3 years later, Jobs proudly used the open source KDE engine to build Apple's Safari web browser. No way, right? Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Engines of Innovation. As this explainer shows, both the commercial giants and the grassroots hobbyists have incredibly valid arguments regarding how innovation is fueled. Think of this through the perspective of economic historians like Schumpeter and Alfred D. Chandler. From their view, large enterprises and massive capitalization are vital engines. Big businesses have the resources to scale up production, maintain complex systems, and ultimately raise the standard of living in ways a decentralized group simply cannot. Gates was essentially arguing this exact point back in '76.
Now, what's incredibly fascinating about this slide is the ultimate economic irony. The hobbyists vehemently refused to pay $500 for BASIC. They pirated it, copied it endlessly, and shared it like wildfire. But that rampant copying is exactly what made Microsoft BASIC the unquestioned industry standard. Hardware manufacturers ended up paying Microsoft massive licensing fees simply because everyone was already using their software. The pirates essentially did all the marketing for Microsoft, cementing their monopoly. So we can neutrally observe that without both forces, the modern tech ecosystem simply wouldn't exist. The hacker ethos distributed the code, built a passionate community, and proved the concept. But big business provided the massive capital, the professional maintenance, and the global scale required to put a computer on every single desk. They are really two halves of the whole shebang.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. As you look at the apps on your phone today or the servers powering the web, who really built our digital world? Is it the lone hackers sharing code for free in their garages, or the billion-dollar corporate labs demanding a return on their investment? It's a massive debate that started with a dropped paper tape 50 years ago, and you know what? We are still trying to answer it today.